And this is the Tamron 35-150. This thing is an awesome lens for street photography and video. Today we're going to take a look at what makes this thing so cool.
What are you doing here, Kyle? How did you get here?
Peter Lindgren?
Wasn't locked? Did I forget to lock? Like, holy no! Is that my lens? Holy shit. Oh no, I don't have the 35-150. That's all good. All good, Kyle!
Hey, so today we came to Gothenburg, Sweden, and I wanted to test out the Tamron 35-150, kind of just see if this was like an all-around travel lens, mostly for photography, but also for video as well. This thing has that, like I said, 35mm all the way to 150mm, so I wanted to see if that was enough to where all I had to bring was this lens. So this lens is an f2 to f2.8, which is going to be really good for like lower light situations, and it's going to be really good for those like blurry backgrounds. And there is a bunch of settings on this camera that you can pre-program with the like USB link inside here, where you can change like 3 different custom settings, and then it does have the autofocus, manual focus switch. And it does have a couple toggle switches on the lens itself that you can program to do different functions. We're not going to get too much into that. But one thing I will say right away is that I love the fact that this lens doesn't really creep. A lot of these heavy lenses, when you hold them like this, the lens kind of just starts to fall. Because if you're walking around with this lens, you want it to kind of stay intact. So for me, using this lens, the one thing I really liked about it on a trip like this is that you do get that ability to shoot 35mm. And if you're doing things like street photography, 35mm is a really good starting point. It's actually a really common focal length for a lot of street photography as well. It's not always my go-to, but 35 is a very popular focal range for that subject. So there's that 150mm, which is also really good at pushing in on subjects if you're doing street photography that are further away from you, which is really nice for me because I like shooting stuff where people aren't staring at me, because I like being a little more incognito with my street photography. So the 35mm is a pretty wide angle lens. It's going to work well for landscapes. It's not going to be quite as good as a 24 or a 16 depending on your landscape. So starting with photography, let me talk about some of the pros with this lens. So the 35-150 is like a really versatile focal range to have. It's really good in that f2 to f2.8 as well, because most lenses like this do have a variable aperture where they go up to like a 5.6. That's also why this thing is so heavy and big of a lens, because keeping that f.2 to 2.8 it has to be physically this big. So some of the pros with the video on this lens that I do like is that because of that weight, it's actually easy to be really steady with the lens when you're doing panning or like B-roll or things like that. And then having that ability, once again, for 35 all the way to 150 is a really awesome focal range for video, because you can get those kind of establishing shots, that you can get the real pushed in detail shots. I really liked this a lot for like video B-roll. I do wish that this lens was stabilized, but realistically, when I was in active stabilization, I felt like it did a pretty good job on this camera keeping it steady. So just like the weight of this lens, the price is also quite a bit. This lens is like $1,900, so if you are going to be looking at this lens, it is quite an investment, but you are getting a beefy, well-built lens. I honestly felt like in my hand, this felt a lot like it's like a Sigma lens to me. It felt kind of like my Sigma 24-70, because I'm used to the Tamrons being a little bit more plasticky, but this thing is like a rock of a lens. It is very durable. It looks very beefy. It did really good with autofocusing. I felt like it didn't struggle a lot. A lot of that might be just the camera itself. Sometimes I actually did have a couple shots though when I was in landscape shooting some of those trams where it wanted to just focus to the ground, but I'm guessing a lot of that was because it was dark and it just sometimes focus points have a problem with it. But I thought the focus was really fast on this lens when it was locking, because people would run across the frame, immediately they'd have that eye tracking. So the speed of this thing was great. I think it's an all-around great lens to have. So the Tamron 35-150, this thing is like a 2.5 pound. This thing is kind of a tank for a photographer. So we brought in the heavy guns to see.
Yeah, you know what? I tried this lens out for a bit, and what I love about Tamron lenses is the range that they got. Like you have the 28-75, it's very price worthy, and then you have, what is the new lens? They have like what is it, like 50 to 400 or something like that?
1 to 4. 100 to 400, something like that.
Yeah, it's a sick lens.
Their versatility is great.
Yeah, and this one is a 35 to 150, and you have the f2 and 2.8, which makes it a very versatile lens. However, though, what I always feel with Tamron lenses is that it leaves you wishing for a little bit more. It's like you always want that little bit extra or a little bit wider. I was using 28-75 for, I think it was like 3 years, almost non-stop. And it always made me wish for a little bit more. But then eventually I went over to prime lenses and I've been stuck there ever since. Not a huge fan of big zoom lenses, but this range I like.
Yeah. For me, I kind of wanted this to be like a 24 to 200 or something like that. Because 35 was just almost wide enough. And 150, I kept putting on my
I feel like 150 is like, yeah, not quite there.
Yeah. So that's why I always kept going to my like Super 35 to make it like a 200. So
yeah, but that was also the same thing that when I used these, what was like 70 to 180 with Tamron, I always felt like 180 was not enough. So it's like it always leaves you wishing for a little bit more when you use the lenses.
But when you grab this guy, which is the 70 to 200,
it's a perfect range.
The problem with this is that it's a 70, so it's not wide enough. But you already know that. So it's like when you have a really versatile lens, you want more. But when you have a very specific, like this is going to be zoomed in and more zoomed in, you already know that, and you're not going to like try to make a wide landscape shot with this lens.
And I think that the biggest difference between these two lenses is that with this, you know the limitations. Like you have this for a specific reason. With this, you think that it's going to be like sort of an all-round lens, and it is an all-round lens. You can use it for a bunch of stuff. When it comes to sharpness and all that stuff, fantastic lens. However, though, the range, I would personally say that having a 70-200 and then having a 24-70 is going to be a better option.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah. Although that 70 to 200 is also about as heavy as this.
Yeah, true.
If it's like,
if
it's a Sigma, but
it all depends on what you're going to use it for.
Yeah.
For example, if you want to maintain a low weight and have a bunch of different apertures in one single lens, this is the camera.
So with that said, I know like Chris Brockhurst brought up a point too, where he's got his 16 to 35, his 35 to 150, and then he's got his 200 to 600.
Yeah.
So I mean, like if you have
that's a good point as
if you have a set or a kit you're trying to build, this is like a outrageously awesome mid-range lens.
It is for sure
because it fills that middle gap, and then you can go to your big zoom lenses.
And also compared to the price, like it's a
$700 cheaper than this.
Yeah, and considering the quality that you get in this lens, it's definitely going to be a better option for that price than going up to this lens. However, though, going up to this lens means that you're going to have something that lasts you for 10 years without worry.
The cool thing with this, though, is that you can go in with their like USB-C port and program these buttons, program custom switches to change those buttons. But I haven't set that up, so I haven't really used it, so it didn't affect me at all.
So what's your verdict on this? Like the final?
My verdict was I really liked it for photography. I think it's going to be good for indoor photography, like weddings, because you won't be further away than 150 needed.
Yeah.
35 is probably wide enough for like a wedding reception or something. But street photography, I got to 150 and was like, I want more. I want a little bit more. Plus Curtis was I was seeing his like the same shot he did on his 200. And I was like, that's what I wanted. I wanted that shot, but I only could go to 150.
Just a little bit tighter.
And like, yeah, you can do your crop on the Super 35, but then you are reducing the resolution on your photo too. So, but I liked it. It's just for me as a one lens to bring traveling, it's a bit heavy. Yeah. It's a bit cumbersome for that. I know it's not as good of a lens aperture wise, but that Tamron 28 to 200 is a really good option for like a one lens trip. If you do want, I have a video on that. You could check that out as well. But I don't know. It's one that I would consider. But I think if I'm going to spend the money, I'm going to go with the 70 to 200.
In my opinion, what I like to have is the 1635 and then one prime lens in between the 1635 and the 7200. That is like 1635, one prime, and then 7200. That's my entire travel kit.
Well, anyways, Peter, thanks for having us out here. It's been great.
All the way from Minnesota.
Minnesota, yeah.
Do you have a specific accent there?
I mean, everyone says
Minnesota.
Oh yeah, you betcha.
Oh, you betcha, yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
You
know.
You are from Minnesota.
It's very Scandinavian.
Is that how you say it? Yeah. Hello there. I'm from Minnesota.
You know, and also doubling down, this thing was a really heavy lens to carry through those like rocky terrain.
Oh shit.
There was a couple times where I almost just totally biffed it on a rock, and you're like,
So, crushed the front element.
When we were originally walking with the 1635, that was a much easier to walk environment. So, but yeah, if you guys like this video, go ahead and hit that like button.
Don't forget to subscribe.
Subscribe to the channel and follow along to more videos like this.
Let's get him 10K.
We'll catch you on the next one, guys. Later.